Today we're going to talk about cortisol and aldosterone. In order to understand the adrenal glands, we must first look at the endocrine system to get a better understanding. So the endocrine system is made up of the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the thyroid, the parathyroid, the adrenals, the pineal body, and the reproductive organs. The pancreas is considered part of the system due to the part that it plays in for the hormone production for digestion. The endocrine system regulates activities that require duration rather than speed. The endocrine glands release hormones, blood-borne chemical messengers that act on target cells located a long distance from the endocrine gland. So most target cell activities under hormonal control are directed toward maintaining homeostasis. So the central endocrine glands, which are in or closely associated with the brain, include the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the pineal gland. The hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary gland act as a unit to release hormones essential for maintaining water balance, for giving birth, and for breastfeeding. The hypothalamus also secretes regulatory hormones that control the hormonal output of the anterior pituitary gland, which secretes 6 hormones that in turn largely control the hormonal output of several peripheral endocrine glands. So one anterior pituitary hormone, the growth hormone, promotes growth and influences nutrient homeostasis. The pineal gland secretes a hormone important in establishing the body's biological rhythms. The word adrenal will tell us all about the location in the body. The word ad means next to, and the term renal refers to the kidneys. So when you look at the diagram, you will see that the adrenal glands are the yellow that are situated or snugly tucked up on top of the kidneys. You will also see the arteries and the veins in the diagram in red and blue respectively. The adrenal glands are also known as the suprarenal glands. These adrenals are positioned on the uppermost part of the kidneys. So the adrenals are slightly triangular in appearance. They produce hormones that regulate the various systems in our body. Examples would be blood pressure, metabolism, the immune system, and the response to stress. This slide will show you the capsule that encloses the adrenal gland, and it goes all the way around. The capsule encapsulates the entire thing. So the medulla is the innermost part that you'll see in the center of the gland, and right below the capsule is the layer called the adrenal cortex, and it's made up of 3 different zones or zona, and you can see them there in the slide: the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, the zona reticularis. The adrenal gland is broken down into 2 parts, the cortex and the medulla, and each part is responsible for producing different hormones. So when the adrenal glands do not produce enough hormones, it can contribute to something like Addison's disease. If nodules develop in the adrenal glands, whether they are malignant or benign, they can still lead to excessive hormones that lead to various other health-related conditions. Don't have to be cancerous in order to still cause your body to have problems. So this slide will show a cross-section and a view of what the cells look like under the microscope. The adrenal glands have 2 main parts anatomically: the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. So the cortex is the outermost region and the largest part of the adrenal glands. And the cortex takes up about 90% of the weight of the entire gland. The adrenal cortex is divided into the 3 zones that we just talked about, and they are each responsible for producing specific hormones. The medulla is located on the inside, and it produces the stress hormones, including the adrenaline. There is a capsule of adipose tissue that encloses the adrenal gland for protection. So the adrenal cortex produces steroid hormones and mineralocorticoid hormones, and steroid hormones regulate carbohydrates and fat metabolism. Mineralocorticoid hormones regulate salt and water balance. The adrenal medulla produces epinephrine and norepinephrine. So when epinephrine is secreted in response to low blood sugar, exercise, or stress, it will break down the storage of the sugar, glucose in the liver, and this will result in the release of fatty acids from the adipose tissue, causing dilation of the small arteries within the muscle. And this leads to an increase in the output of the heart. And when norepinephrine is secreted by the adrenal glands, the patient's blood pressure will increase as the blood vessels constrict. So the zones of the adrenal cortex look very different from each other. The zona glomerulosa look like spheres, the zona fasciculata look like rods, and the zona reticularis look more like nets. It's kind of hard to see, but if that was blown up, you would see that clear. Just know the layer that they come down, the order that they are in, from the outer to the inner. So the outer zone of the adrenal cortex makes the steroid aldosterone, which is a mineralocorticoid. The middle zone produces the cortisol, which is the glucocorticoid. And in the adrenal medulla, epinephrine and norepinephrine are produced. The adrenal gland's job in the body is to release hormones straight into the bloodstream. Numerous hormones have to do with how the body responds to stress. So some hormones are essential to actually our very existence. The adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex, while both being in the adrenal gland, they complement each other by performing separate, distinct tasks. So you can see when you look at the slide, it will show from the adrenal cortex where there are the three zones down to the medulla where the epinephrine and norepinephrine are. When you look at the slide where the stress is on the top right side of the slide in the hypothalamus, as it travels down, you will see the CRF that leads to the ACTP and the pituitary. Then it carries down to the adrenal cortex. And notice that all of these have positive charges associated with them. And then you will see the hydrocortisone, part of the feedback loop, head back up to the pituitary and the hypothalamus. And notice that these both have a negative change associated with them. Cortisol is one of the crucial hormones produced by the adrenal cortex. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid hormone produced by the zona fasciculata, and cortisol has several important roles in the body. Cortisol helps control your blood pressure, decrease bone formation, and increase blood sugar. It assists with the use of fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. It is also helpful in suppressing inflammation. The sleep and wake cycle also involve cortisol. When your body experiences an emergency, the stress through cortisol will give the body energy that it needs to handle the situation. The adrenal glands work to produce cortisol in response to signals from the pituitary gland in the brain. In turn, this is a response to signaling from the hypothalamus. This is called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. An example of the adrenal to produce cortisol occurs when the hypothalamus produces the corticotropin releasing hormones, CRH, that stimulate the pituitary gland to secrete adrenocorticotropin hormones, which is much easier to say ACTH than to spit all of that out. So the ACTH stimulates the adrenal glands to make and release cortisol hormones into the blood. The hypothalamus and the pituitary gland sense whenever the blood contains the correct amount of cortisol. So if there's too much or not enough, these glands change the amount of CRH and ACTH that gets released. This is what is referred to as the negative feedback loop. Excess cortisol production can occur from a nodule in the adrenal gland. This excess production also may be because of ACTH from a tumor in the pituitary or actually somewhere else in the body. Aldosterone is a mineralocorticoid hormone produced by the zona glomerulosa, and it plays a role in regulating blood pressure and electrolytes, sodium and potassium. So it signals the kidneys, causing the absorption of more sodium into the bloodstream and releasing potassium into the urine. So it also regulates the blood's pH, controlling the levels of electrolytes in the blood. An excess of cortisol in the body can lead to a condition called Cushing's syndrome. Pardon me. The symptoms include weight gain and fat deposits in specific places like the face, the back of the neck, and they call this a buffalo hump sometimes, and the abdomen. It can also, it can be too much or overproduction in the adrenal glands, or it can be triggered by overproduction of ACTH by a benign tumor in the pituitary or somewhere else. Other causes can be prolonged use of external steroids that are prescribed to treat autoimmune or inflammatory diseases such as arthritis, asthma, lupus, and others. I was kind of upset here a while back when I got taken off a steroid that I really liked on my asthma, but after studying about this, I'm glad he took me off of that. The diagram shows the most predominant and easier symptoms to recognize for Cushing's syndrome. So if you want to look at the diagram, you can see the purple stretch marks and bruising on the abdomen area, as well as the rounded face where the fat deposits, and then the hump on the back is really easy to recognize. Okay, so on this chart, we have the common disorders of the adrenocortical function. So let's just look at the conditions down the left, see what happens, and then the final results. So an excess of aldosterone is called hyperaldosteronism. So if you have an increase in it, it can result in hypertension, hypokalemia, alkalosis, and then there is the secondary hyperaldosteronism, and it's too much aldosterone and renin, and it results in the same thing, hypertension, hypokalemia, and alkalosis. And then there's Cushing's, so that's where your cortisol increases, but your ACTH can go up or down depending, and you'll see an altered appearance, bruising, muscle wasting, hypertension, diabetes, and hypokalemia. Then there is Addison's, where the cortisol and the aldosterone both decrease, and you'll see things like hypoglycemia, hyponatremia, hypokalemia, and raised urea. If it is acute, you will see abdominal pain, vomiting, dehydration, and hypotension. If it is chronic, you will see fatigue, pigmentation changes, anorexia, weight loss, and postural hypotension, which is like if somebody is sitting down or laying down and then they stand up and their blood pressure has just dropped and it doesn't It's not like it's caught up. So we have one more slide here that highlights the symptoms of Addison's disease. I actually have a friend that has Addison's disease, and she doesn't take any medication. She's very sick most of the time. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, do you think long-term anorexia could lead to Addison's disease, and why? Also, I want to note that not all cancers that we end up seeing in the adrenal glands originate in the glands. Most of them are spread from other primary tumors somewhere else in the body. So a quick review, and we've already done the question, is we started with looking at the endocrine system. Then we broke it down into the adrenal glands. We looked at the medulla and the cortex and how all, and these are all of the works that I cited for this PowerPoint. Thank you.